Hello, and welcome to the Nonprofit Narrative Podcast. My name is Dan Portnoy. Thanks for being here. So, this is a podcast about nonprofits, and it's about things that nonprofits care about. Today, we're going to talk with Lara Pimentel, and she is with OSA Philanthropy. And OSA Philanthropy helps people with grants. So, we're going to talk a lot about grant writing. We're going to talk about the story piece behind it and how to secure the big dollars for your next big project. So, let's head to Lara.
I'm so excited to have you here. In this month, we're talking so much about strategy, and we're talking about how our nonprofits can be strategic. And you, being a grant expert, I feel like grants are a really crucial thing for strategy, especially when we're talking about money. So, Laura, can you give us just a little bit of like background on who you are, where you're coming from, and why we should be listening to you?
I started out my career working in a foundation at a local community foundation, helping with the donor advised funds, but also with the designated grants and also with the discretionary grants. So getting to know my local nonprofits, what the whole process is like to submit a grant and what it's like on the grant maker side. I then fellowed at another community foundation where I got even more deeper into that. Then I kind of switched over to the nonprofit side where I ran a collective impact organization for several years, working with organization partners, trying to raise funds, trying to figure out very strategically how do you work with these different partners to create revenue for your organization, not only for your organization but for community impact. And then I moved over to national fundraising. I was senior director of development for a national literacy organization. So I was doing everything from grant strategy, grant writing, prospecting, individual donor relationships, and all of the things that go with that, the planned giving, the campaigns, the annual stuff, corporate sponsorships, corporate everything. So, I feel pretty well versed in the fundraising world, and particularly with grants. I've been consulting. I opened OSA Philanthropy last year in 2023 because I really like fundraising is one of those things that if organizations had more resources, they could make more impact and the world would be a better place. But getting those resources is just hard. It takes time and it takes patience and it takes know-how. And a lot of organizations just don't have that, right? They don't have the bandwidth, they don't have the staff time, they just don't have it. And so I want to be there to help.
Great. Yeah, because COVID only made things worse. I mean, I feel like people were wearing like 5 or 6 hats
No.
before COVID. And then since COVID, it's like now it's like nine
Yeah.
or 10. And it's crazy. So that tyranny of the urgent is just
And
everywhere.
you've got to know how to prioritize your urgency, right? Because everything feels urgent all the time, whether it's in your nonprofit organization or in your own personal life. But you have to be able to kind of separate out. And so, like this concept of strategy and where do grants even fit in with that strategy? But just this bigger conversation around strategizing for organizations and nonprofits, really being able to like, let's take a step, let's take a breath and think
Hmm.
about where do we really want to go and what's in alignment with where we want to go. And that's really like I think the guts of what I'm all about is let's make sure we're in alignment, and let's make sure that we're really thoughtful about how we work together, because that's only going to make things better and not worse.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Um, so
Okay.
let's start at the beginning. Most nonprofits, what do you think the most common challenges are when nonprofits are looking for grants, and how do you help? How do you what's your strategy on overcoming some of those hurdles? How do
Yeah.
we best get around it?
I think one of the most difficult challenges with grants in particular is it's a numbers game. There's like it's an art and a science, right? So there's a numbers game to it. There's a math thing to here. So this is what I mean about the science. There's also not formulas specifically like math formulas, but there's ways to write a grant that can be more successful than other ways to write a grant, right? There's certain ways to answer questions that are critical.
Sure.
So that's the science part of it. the art part of it, I think, and I think a lot of people understand the science part of it. Board members, in particular, CEOs, kind of understand, hey, if we want to reach this dollar amount of funding, then how many funders do we need to have in our pipeline? How many grants do we have to put out? What are those numbers? Um, the more difficult piece, I think, is the art part. It's the relationships. It's the how do you find a funder? How do you know that a funder is really aligned to your organization? How do you then start a relationship with a funder? Because there's actually recent research that just came out from the Grant Professionals Association about relationships. And we've all known for a long time that relationships matter when it comes to getting funding, but they actually did research on it and they have it
Kind of important.
to prove that. So, how do you spark up a relationship, especially when it's a funder who doesn't accept unsolicited proposals and they don't really want to talk to you? How do
Right.
maintain those relationships? Because just because you got funding once doesn't mean you're automatically going to get it a second time or a third time. So, those are some of the hurdles. So what OSA does, and what I've seen really from my experience is, we start with, let's make sure that we're combining the art and the science. Let's make sure that when we're strategizing for a nonprofit, we're looking at what is the impact that you really want to make. When do you want to make that impact? Is that realistic over a certain amount of time with the financial resources that you need? And then let's play the numbers game, right? How many prospects do you really need in order to get to where you want to go? And then I'm going to help you. We're going to help you like work that, build those relationships, figure out the network. How do you get in? How do you talk to those funders that aren't necessarily interested in having a phone call? And you have to have patience. And that's one of the biggest things that, um, that's it's not hard to understand, but when you're in the moment, like we talked about urgency, when you're in that moment of like, I need money now, um, we've got to think about other strategies for
Right.
that, because grant funding might not be the answer to that.
Right. Because it's
Yeah.
more of a long
Yeah. I
game.
mean,
Right. I mean, it's like I think of individual fundraising as kind of
mhm,
the short game of fundraising, whereas grants are much more long game. Because I don't know what the timeline is, but between putting
oh
something
yeah.
in and hearing back,
Oh
that's
yeah.
months,
Yeah,
right?
I
Like
mean,
that's
we
usually
say anywhere from like 9 months, from the time you find a funder, like start researching the funder. You never know when their window is going to be. It could be they only open up a proposal every year. And so, you never know when that's gonna happen. Um, and then, like you said, once you put in the proposal, or sometimes it's an LOI process, right? You've got to put in an inquiry before, and then you've got to wait for them to approve the inquiry and invite you to the actual full proposal. So yeah, it can take months, and then for that money to actually come into the door, yeah, it's a good 9 months, sometimes 12 months for that to actually come over the transom. So yeah, it's definitely a long game.
and what is an
A
LOI?
letter of intent or letter of inquiry. So it's kind of just something that
Oh,
says,
okay,
here's who we are, this is what we want to do, this is why we think we're a fit with your foundation, and this is, sometimes they'll ask for like a dollar amount. This is
got
about
it.
what we think it would cost. But it's typically a much shorter intro. Think of it as like an introduction letter.
Oh, all right, perfect. As soon as the
Sorry, and
acronyms
I'll
come out,
try to
I'm
be
always
better
quick
about
to be
that.
like, I don't, no worries, no worries. Okay, so how do you approach this? How do you make sure that your grant proposals
Mhm.
are standing out? Because if somebody's like offering a thing like, hey, I want a program in the city that helps people, that that covers a lot of different things, and then you've got hundreds of people. It's
Right.
national or whatever, so hundreds, maybe even thousands of proposals are going in. How do you make sure that my nonprofit organization stands out
Yeah, it's
compared
a
to
great
somebody
question.
else?
Research. So that's like the biggest thing. If you can research, take the time to really, first of all, how aligned are you to this foundation in the first place? Don't just scattershot. Don't just send in proposals to whoever, because they don't like that. It's a waste of their time. I just talked to a program officer recently. She said they got 3,000 inquiries. This is like, can you imagine? And like they have to read them all 3,000. And this is not a huge staff that's reading through all of these inquiries. And this was an inquiry. This wasn't even the invitation. So they have to go through 3,000. And she said to me, and I'm getting stuff that's totally misaligned. Like they did not do their homework. They did not know what they were talking about, why we were a fit, why we should fund them. So first and foremost, do your research. Make sure that you're submitting to a foundation that actually is interested in what you do, funds your geography, is within your range of funding, just the basics. I mean, just start there. Secondly, if you can get a call with a funder and try to talk about your program ahead of time, even if you can't get into specific detail or get a specific invitation to submit, if it's just an open call and you can have that conversation with them, they're going to like put it together that much easier when the application comes over their desk. Third, I would say, remember that these people also have a board to report to too. They have their own impact that they're trying to make. And grant making it sounds so like luxurious, right? Compared to fundraising sometimes, but it's hard. It's really hard.
Sure.
Because they've got limited resources and, have to figure out, how do I make the most impact? And so when you're writing a proposal, a lot of times foundations are thinking about grants as investments, right? And so they want to know, as anybody who's making an investment, can this organization actually deliver on what they say they're going to deliver on? So they're looking at your organization pretty thoroughly, a lot of them, especially depending on the dollar amount. And so really aligning your message to how are we going to best help you, foundation, meet your mission and make the impact you want to make? How can we give you a really solid story to tell about this, about our partnership and about the impact that we're making together? Because so many foundations really, that's what they, not the PR isn't what they care about, but it's the impact. They want you to be successful so that they can then go to their board and say, look, great, we were successful together. So packaging it in that way is, I think, a really critical key.
Yeah, I always think about that when you're working with a boss or whatever. Is like, what are their problems? And if I can solve those ones, I'm working so much better. So what do you think are so thinking of that and the grantor's side of things, what are the key elements that they're looking for in that successful grant application? I mean, obviously you said research, but what are there, is there like flowery words, maybe some bull crap mixed in? I mean, what are we trying to do?
Try to stay away from the jargon, try to stay away from the flowery stuff. They can see through that. A lot of times, as anybody who's written a grant maybe knows, there's word limits, right? And they're doing this on purpose because, as I just mentioned, some people have to read through 3,000 submissions and they don't have time to read through 10 pages of 3,000 submissions. So, you really want to get to the point of what you're going to do. And like I said before, encapsulate it in how you're helping them meet their mission. You don't have to say it necessarily in those words. We are going to help you, foundation, to meet your mission by X, but you can use their words, right? So if they say poverty alleviation, use the words poverty alleviation, right? If there's specific phrases that they like to use that are in their strategic plan, if you can get a hold of that, or you've heard interviews of them, heard or read interviews of them, and they use specific phrasing, that's a great indicator of okay, how can I frame my program or my ask in that context? So they're like, oh, they get it. It signals to them they've done their research, they get what we're about, and they understand that how their program is going to help our foundation meet our mission too.
I mean, that makes a ton of sense. So with that, then, has anything changed? Like I said, with COVID has changed it so much for your average nonprofit. Has it also changed kind of the landscape of grants? And has that influenced it? I mean, is it like people have less money, or grants have, do foundations now have less money than your average person, or do they have more money? What are some of the trends that we should be thinking of and worried
I have
about?
several that I thought about here. So, uh, as like financially speaking, I was talking to another foundation executive director recently who pointed out election years are notoriously bad for returns. So for their investment returns. So we're in an election year right now. It's probably not going to be a higher than normal spending year. Plus, when you kind of think about that on top of the volatility in general that the market has seen, right? We'll have some great years, and then we'll have some down years, some good months, some bad months. It just makes funders a little bit more nervous to open up the purse strings, especially for multi-year funding. So I would say multi-year funding from a foundation, like actually committing ahead of time, I'm going to fund you for 3 years, is really on the decline. I think also funders are looking for collaboration. This isn't new. That's not new information. Funders have been looking for collaborations for a long time. But kind of how you talk about those collaborations, how deep they are, I think funders are a lot more like keen to the deepness of those collaborations. I've also seen, and I don't know if this is a trend, but it's something that I've seen in my work, so I'm going to flag it here. Privacy. I've seen funders who have been more open, like the ED is willing to take a phone call from a nonprofit, to those now moving all inquiries through a third party, such as the bank that might manage them, their foundation. And so, again, like donor advised funds are a fun thing to kind of think about when it comes to privacy and anonymity when it comes to donors. Um, Private foundations have a little bit more of this option too. I've looked at 990s recently where I know that there's been a way to get a hold of that foundation previously, and and I can't find phone numbers anymore. And I've gone back in 990s years when I knew that
Oh,
it was
wow.
like available. I don't know if they can change it or what, but it's an interesting shift there. And it's not all of them by any means, but it's something I noticed recently that that I just want to flag there because it makes it that much harder, right, for an organization to figure it out.
Yeah, access being in.
But you
Yeah, I
also
would think
understand
access.
why,
Yeah.
because a lot more foundations are seeing a lot more applications. I think the tools that exist now for nonprofit organizations to sleuth around and find out who the potential funders are and how do I connect to them have proliferated. Now, we're a little bit more savvy on the nonprofit side, and therefore now these funders they have more decisions to make, right? They still have the same pot of money potentially, and a lot more applications coming their way. So you can understand it from a bandwidth side of why they might be doing it. But I think it gets frustrating on a nonprofit side from accessibility and, all sorts of other questions that come up there. So those are some,
Sure. I would think.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, those are some, I
Go
guess
ahead.
one
Sorry.
other that I want to flag is a lot of funders are going beyond the 5% payout. However, you gotta think about what they're doing. So if you don't know what I mean by the 5% payout, foundation.
Yeah, I was just
What
going
does
to
that
say,
mean?
what's the 5%
So
payout?
by law, foundations have to pay out 5% of their investment income. It's not of the corpus; it's of the investment income of the corpus of the original, right, of the amount of the endowed amount, basically of what makes up a foundation. So by law, they have to pay out 5%. Um, some are paying 8%, 10%, and that's amazing. They have to then think about what that means for the rest of those capital gains that they're realizing and or not realizing, and make some decisions. So you see a lot of foundations now doing um, different types of investments, not necessarily with the 5% payout, not necessarily with the discretionary money that they've allocated for grant making, but more with kind of the corpus. And so, things like um, investing in a CDFI. I can't think of what that stands for. Kind of a credit union that invests in local community economic development. Um, so like, can we make an investment so that banking is more available to local residents of a certain community where they might not have had a bank? And making $1 million deposit in that bank so that that can be something uh, that actually comes to realization. So, how are foundations using all that money that they're sitting on in other ways, so that it's not just the 5% that's going to good, but it's the full 100% that's going to good. And so, like, when you're doing your research, you kind of have to look at all of that too, and think about um, all of the ways that that foundation is working, and thinking about their investments in that way. So it's a big thing, but it's like it's definitely a landscape shift.
Yeah, and I would think also, since COVID has made the world crazier, I would think that the need for privacy is because I feel like nonprofit call them up and be like, "Why didn't you give me this money?"
Yeah,
And
not a good look.
and then all of a sudden people are having awkward conversations and being hunted down at their
Uh-huh.
house,
At
and
the grocery
stuff like that.
store,
So
yeah, you gotta be
it makes
careful
sense. It
sometimes.
makes sense. Yeah, I can't believe you didn't fund us. What's wrong with you?
I will tell you,
Oh
Dan,
man,
when I
that seems
worked in
like
a
a tough
foundation, I
conversation.
actually had a
Yeah.
nonprofit say to me, and I was a very new employee, a nonprofit actually say to me something like, "I can't believe this foundation makes us grovel at your feet." And I was just like this young employee, and I was like, I don't even know what to say, and it was this community meeting. It wasn't the space. It was just, so yes, you're saying it as if it doesn't happen or it's like this crazy thing, but it
Wow.
happens, and it happens all over the place.
Yikes. 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 Well, I'm not signing up to work at a foundation. I just keep the awkward conversations with my teens.
Good
So
choice.
that works out. Um, what? Yeah. Well, maybe. I don't know. It's they're graduating. It's good. It's good. Um, okay. So let's talk about like um winning strategies, because again it's all about the strategy this month. Winning strategies when you're putting it in, like, is it good to get a grant like in early? I just think of my own kids when we were doing like our FAFSA stuff. It was like
Hmm.
better to get it in earlier than later because there's more money in the beginning than there is later. I mean, are there any other strategies like that
Hmm.
that you deploy? I mean, of course, you can't share with us all of your bag of tricks of things because we have to keep some things back
That's
because
right.
you have to pay for things because experience is important. But I mean, there has to be some just general like uh, strategy pieces that as you're getting things through, because I think of it, grant season is also not dissimilar to um, film season, in the sense of like there's a season for enrollment, like when you're going to put a short film in a festival or something like that. There's a window, and if you don't make the window, well, then you're bumped to the next one. You're bumped to the next one. And there's usually like four when we start talking about Oscars and things like that. But uh, there, you're kind of on a yearly cycle, and it's in
Hmm.
everybody's calendar. So is it kind of similarly with the
Yeah, it can
grant
be. It kind of
situation?
depends on, as far as cycles go, it kind of depends on who your funder pool is, and kind of what they do. Every funder is totally different. So just because one might have a specific cycle does not mean that all of them are on that cycle. You have to definitely follow your funders. So that's one thing. Sign up for newsletters, follow your funders on social, make sure that you kind of know what their cycle is, put it in your calendar, do what you have to do to mark that. You're totally right. Get your grant in early. We have seen funder windows close early because there were so many requests, and they funded them right along. They some funders, like, they'll give you a window. They'll say we're opening grants from April 15th to June 30th, and you're like, oh, cool. I have until June 30th to get my grant in. And then in reality, they're closing that window on like May 27th because they ran out of funds. They're looking at those proposals right along and are allocating funds to that. Now, not all of them do that, but sure, you definitely want to get in sooner than later. Um, the other thing I would
Got it.
say is, again, be patient with relationships. Like, be patient with relationships, and be picky about who you um actually apply to. Your time is worth it too. So don't think about just the foundation officer who's got to read the 3,000 proposals. Think about all the proposals that you as an organization have to spend time and energy on, and what else could you be doing if you weren't writing proposals to organizations, foundations that aren't a good fit. right? So be really thoughtful about how you align your grants calendar in a year, and 2 years, 3 years out, and then just, yeah, like, be really thoughtful about, then how can I cultivate these relationships? How can I make sure that if it's stewardship, because you already know the foundation, what are you doing for that? What are you sending to them that's unique, to keep them excited about you? And if it's a brand new relationship that you're trying to cultivate, well, how and where can you do that? And just thinking ahead of the game. Don't do stuff last minute when it comes to grants. As we said, this is a long game. So um, not only just getting your grants in early and making sure you know the questions and you can kind of work through that with your team. Always include a team. I'm a consultant, but I will always work with the development director. And if the development director doesn't want to talk to the program people for some reason, I will always, within reason, right? Like, you want the right people at the table to have the best
Yeah.
proposal. And you need the finance sign off, right? You need all the right ducks in a row in order to submit something for an organization that is actually going to work for them. um, and, like, be realistic about what you're putting into your proposal. um, if it's an audacious project that you're that you're submitting for, and it's sky's the limit, then by all means go sky's the limit. But if it's a funder that $50,000 is the cap, um, not only stick within that budget, but also, like, be realistic about what your organization can deliver for $50,000 or whatever that budget might be.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense. That makes sense. No, so do they also, is it like, I'm thinking of the timeline idea. And if I want to build a relationship with someone, like, when the pressure's off, like, when the window's already closed and you're like, hey, so I just want to be
Hmm.
ready for next year. Can I take you out for a coffee meetup or something like that? If they're local, I mean, I suppose they're not always going to be local if they're national, but I think like Hilton Foundation here in town, because they do
Hmm.
so much with housing, or they do, that way. So when their window shut, what a
Exactly.
great time to develop that relationship and start meeting. Um, in terms of like, so when I think of grants, I really don't think it's necessarily, like, in my experience, I usually get
Okay.
brought in at the end, because someone will say things like, "Hey, so our grant just seems kind of drab, or it seems very, like an Excel spreadsheet, like it just has that personality, and it doesn't have any whimsy to it. Dan, can we do something about it so we can stand out?" So the storytelling game usually comes in kind of at the end. Do you find that is that the norm, or should a storytelling kind of principle be brought in earlier to help tell the story of what we're going to do to get that funding? Do you think
Yeah,
that
it's a
helps in
it's a
any way?
good way to phrase that question, because grant writing, again, art and science, right? So sometimes you have character limits and they ask very specific questions. So, of course, you need to answer the question that the funder is asking for. So you can't, I guess my point there is, you can't always story tell in every opportunity that you're, talking to a funder, or writing to a funder. I think it is an interesting thing to think about. Um, what is the story that we're going to tell this foundation? Like, it almost goes along with the strategy for the foundation, because every funder that you want to apply to and you're thinking about, every prospect in your list, you should have a strategy for, right? So, like, I, with my clients, we'll look at a funder, we'll say, this is the specific program area that we think we're a fit for, and this is our program area, this is the foundation's program area, this is where we see the alignment. um, and have that, like, this is the dollar amount we think would make sense to ask for. And then we'll start to we'll kind of work all of the communications based on that. And again, I go with a relationship approach. So I'm not just filling out cold proposals, as hopefully not, although sometimes a cold proposal is your first approach, and that's strategic in many ways. um, and so in that way, when you're doing your communication outreach to the program officer or whoever it might be, that when you're knocking on all the doors to try to talk to somebody, you might be telling stories in that way, right? You might be telling a specific impact story of a beneficiary. You might be telling the story of
Mhm.
your founder. Maybe your founder has a really interesting story. Right, whatever the story is that you're telling, you've got to think about that ahead of time for sure. Of what's the right one, and sometimes it's trial and error, to be honest, because you don't know what's always going to stick. But when it comes to the actual grant application, even if it's so let's say you haven't been able to connect with anybody, it's a cold submission. It's the formulaic, right? Like you've got so many characters that you can use to fill in, because so many more are like that nowadays.
Mhm.
um, where do you put storytelling in there? I think that you can wrap it in when you're talking about your mission. I think there's ways to kind of wrap it in like, we help smallholder farmers in South Carolina, such as Heidi, who benefited in last year and increased her income by X% and was able to buy a car. Right? Like, you don't have to tell Heidi's whole backstory. You don't have to go into like, and that's great
Right.
because now she can take her kids to school and save time, and I don't, whatever it is. You don't have to go into all of it, but you can just do a quick headline, right? Um, there's ways to do that so that kind of wrapped in mission with impact and a super quick story. And then just kind of strategizing out when you can, because not every grant is going to be this way, but when you can kind of strategize out, when you have a narrative opportunity, what's like the outline, what's the way that you need to build on everything, so that when this foundation is reading your proposal, it's clear, it's compelling, and it's nice, and you're putting your best case forward. And a lot of times your best case is going to be some form of storytelling, especially about impact, beneficiaries, that type of thing. So yeah, I think it's critical.
Yeah, I mean, I've been involved with like there'll be I think there was one time they were like, we're supposed to have a website where we talk about all of our impact, and I'll be like, okay, and then they'll be like, can you make that? I'm like, how soon? And they're like,
Hmm.
tomorrow or whatever, it'll be like so crazy, and it'll be like, we need to have this out because the funder is going to take a look at what we've done, and so then we have to use the magic storytelling wand, and
Wow.
okay, look at what we did, and we're putting additional pages up on the website with certain things, and here's this story and this person's story, and here's how it connects. And I love that what you just said of the like, this person was benefited, I mean, it is just a cause and effect. It doesn't have to be storytelling wise, it doesn't have to be like, and then tell me about their whole hero's journey. No, just this is what happened, they were a person that we
Hmm.
found, and then their solution, and this is what it meant for them. It can be so quick. I think sometimes when we say storytelling, I think a lot of people get kind of freaked out, and all of a sudden they start seeing
Mm.
dollars, like, because I said magic words, and sometimes when we don't understand the magic, we just think, well, it's
Hmm.
got to be expensive, whatever we got to do. So that's a really great thing. um, do you think that there are some what are some common misconceptions that nonprofits deal with funders? Because, like, again, I feel like nonprofits, a lot of times everybody's wearing multiple hats, and all of a sudden people are moving in. Now I'm responsible for grants, I never had to do that before, so they're kind of making it up as they go along. Like, how do I connect with things? How do I get going? What are some misconceptions that nonprofits
Hmm.
are that you see when they come to you and they need to get funded? What are some of those things that they can avoid?
So I've got several. Scattershot method. I don't think, as we kind of talked about earlier, think about your return on energy. Think about your return on investment. Is it really the best approach for you to just pump out a bunch of proposals? Some organizations actually make that decision strategically. We're just going to pump out a bunch of proposals. As long as you've thought about it, right? And there's some kind of logic behind that, go for it. Go for it. But but when it's just like, we don't know what else to do, so we're just going to pump out a bunch of proposals, and we don't know if these organizations are well aligned to us or anything, like, no, let's step back and let's think about that. So, because it's not only a numbers game, it's a quality game. Right? A funder's not going to fund you if, like,
Mm.
they don't understand you. First of all, they're not going to fund you if there's no fit. Um, these are all pretty basic things, but um, of course, a relationship is another really important thing. I don't. I think it's pretty well known that that's really important, but I don't know how well known it really is because every organization is different. Every nonprofit is different. Every funder is different. All those relationships are very different. There's now, thank you, Grant Professionals Association. There's now some research behind that. So love that. I think there's also kind of this misconception that once you get funded, you might have like a greater propensity to get funded again, or a greater probability to get funded again, which if you manage that relationship correctly should be true. But if you mess up, if you don't deliver what you said you were going to deliver, or you have not stewarded that relationship, and you're now going back to that same funder, or you're going back to that same funder year over year over year, that is not what a lot of funders are all about. They want to see sustainability. They don't want to be the only one paying for your program or even your general operating support year over year. So, and keep in mind, as we talked about earlier, foundations want to make impact just as much as a nonprofit does. And I think another misconception is that funders are like more removed from the solutions, or more removed from um, the end users, the beneficiaries. And in many ways, that's true, right? Because they're a foundation, so but you have to keep in mind who these people are and where they come from. A lot of times foundation staff are like the experts in the field. I mean, you look at any huge foundations and they've got the best of the best in those fields working for them, and they're people who are not only super experienced and seasoned, but have are very smart. So keep in mind, funders are your allies. Like they are not your nemesis. They are not your roadblock necessarily. It's just a tough game sometimes. And so, the more you can talk to them, the more you can align, the more you can help them help you, the better off you're going to be. And yeah, I think just keeping that in mind, that like we all want to see the world to be better. Like most foundation people would not be in those roles if they were all about making money, or all about, I don't know, something else. They're here because they're humanitarians too, and they want, or whatever they are, right? That's how I classify myself in most generalities. So putting that on is for everybody else to think about. But like that's just keep that big picture in mind, and that like they walk their dogs too. They're doing the same things that we're doing after work. It's just um, they're sitting in a different seat than we are as nonprofits, and so we just have to relate to them differently. And so I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions, is that funders like are removed, and they just want to push their answers on everybody. And it's not to say that doesn't happen, but um, I think a lot of them do it with good intentions and with good reason. And I think one of the trends is that foundations are trying to embrace many are trying to embrace more trust-based philanthropy, where um, they're just instilling that trust in the nonprofit, and that nonprofit is then able to take the resources and do what they need to do with them in order to make the impact that they need to make. So yeah, I hope that.
Okay. Yeah. So
Go ahead.
oh, okay. Yeah. So that's my bad. So when you're working with a client, and you're getting ready to get started, are you also thinking about long term, not only with the funder, but also like, okay, we're going to try this year. This is how we're going to position ourselves, and then next year we're going to come and do this. So you're looking at because I tend to like, I think it's hilarious when people say, hey Dan, we want you to come in, we want you to fix this thing, and they go like, is that like 2 months? And I'll be like, it's like 18 months. It's like 18, because I got to take 6 months to fix everything, and then we got to do a year of doing the thing. before we see the massive adjustment, or a couple of years, that kind of thing. Some of my bigger successes in my own life have been 18 to 36 months. Like, it's just, and everybody's like, well, can you just do that in like 6 weeks? Can we just boil it down? And I'm like, that's just not how anybody works. So that long game is such a tough thing when we start talking about individuals, because it's like, yeah, of course, as the nonprofit, they know their story, they know what's going on, of course they're doing a campaign. But it is so funny that, like, it's throwing that stone in a puddle, and those ripples, they just take so long before somebody's like, wait, are you guys raising money? Like, it will be 3 months into a campaign, and they'll be, oh, you guys are a nonprofit, okay. Like, it doesn't even occur, because everybody's got so much going on. So it just works that way. So what are some of the things that you do with your clients, in positioning them and getting them ready for, um, that they're going to fund something, so they're not just getting like this, and it's kind of that scattershot. It just sounds awful, and I know exactly that process, because they do it in marketing all the time. They're like, well, we'll just, and everybody feels better and they sleep better because we did a thing, and it's like, it's
Right.
not effective at all, but I feel better because I tried something, and nothing's going to come back, and we're going to be in real trouble, but I feel okay. As opposed to doing something a little more strategic. So what are some of the things that you do with your clients to do that long-term
Yeah.
strategy
So
piece?
what we like to do at Osa Philanthropy is start with a funding compass, is what I call it. So this is kind of a combination of the intake process, right? We're getting to know your organization, and I want to know you deeply. Like, I want to know not only what are you all about now, what do you want to be in the future? Why are you here? What's really the problem that you're trying to fix? What's worked in the past? What hasn't worked in the past? Who is like you? Who's not like you? Right? Like, we want to know a lot about the organization. We want to know about the stories that you're telling. We want to know about the impact that you're making. We want to know about your funding. We want to know all of the stuff. We want to know, like, you would be like, I want my board members to ask those questions, because that's always fun, board involvement. So that's that's kind of the first thing. So it's not only an intake where we're getting to know you, and then over time, of course, deepening that relationship and understanding of who you are and what's really going to work and what's not going to work. But we take that information in the very beginning, and do a funding readiness review, if that makes sense for your organization. Some don't need that, but some organizations that might be newer, especially to grant funding, looking at what are those things that foundations ask for a lot of the time, like attachments. What does your guide star profile look like? What does your website look like? What are you saying? What are you not saying? So we'll take a look at all of those things, and then we'll create what's called a funding compass and put this into a report, kind of a narrative report, where we're then making suggestions on what does the strategy look like. So depending on how long we're looking out, if it's 3 years, 5 years, whatever that term looks like, we're really thinking about that. So, okay, well, this year we really, really, really need to get X funded, and it's going to cost us X amount of dollars. So, sure, of course, we're gonna think about that for you, because that's the urgent thing. But we can't stop there. So let's then think about, okay, we can't only do that this year. We have to do that, and we have to build you up for 2025 or whatever the next year coming up is. Um, and so, is that
Yeah.
a grants, right? Is it a grant strategy, and really focusing on grants and putting a lot of energy into that? Is it grants and high net worth individuals? Is it grants and pumping up your planned giving game? What does that really look like? And then on top of that, what are the grant funders that you should actually be going after? Because not all grants are created equal, and not all funders are the same. So you also have to think about, and this is part of the get to know you process, is like, who are the stakeholders who care the most about your mission and what you're doing? And then let's figure out what that alignment really looks like, right? So um, you just might not be a candidate for government funding. It just might not be something that makes sense for your organization. And like, so that would be a recommendation that would come in the funding compass of, this is not something, but we absolutely see potential in private foundations being interested in, workforce development or whatever that might be. So that's kind of the beginning, is really setting us up and being on the same page with what that long term, that short and that long term really look like. And then your everything is like, it's like the weakest link, right? Like nothing is going to be strong if you've got some weak links. So then your research process needs to be super strong. You need to make sure that all those prospects are really,
Right.
really well aligned. As somebody said to me the other day, well, how good is the list? Right? Like you can buy an email list, as you know, Dan, right? You could buy an email list and half those emails bounce.
Right.
Like that's not a good list. Or, hey, I'm already saturated
Yep.
into this market 90%.
No.
Why did I just buy this list? So we give you a really good list and make sure that it's strong and it's aligned and it's not people that you've already talked to or and that's something we work on in the intake process. Um, and then, of course, kind of working on the communication side of things, we're like capacity building too. So it's not just about improving things in the time being. It's about how do you then, as an organization, move forward without having this consultant holding your hand and helping you out. Because another piece that we'll do is what I call roadmap progression. So we'll give you the funder roadmap, and that's the research list. But we'll also do roadmap progression with you, where we're helping you network into those organizations, knock on those doors, have those conversations, say hopefully the right things, to then get an invitation to submit or just continue to cultivate those relationships. And so that's all part of it. Communications goes along with that, because you got to have some strong messaging. The way you talk to a grant funder is different than the way you would write a news article, right? The way you write a grant is not the news angle; it's the impact angle. So you've got to have those. You got to just think about all that stuff, and it's different. And there's different talents and expertises that exist, to do that. So we'll leave you with templates so that you can take those forward and have them for yourself to tweak and edit and replicate. Um, and then, if you need the actual grant writing, we'll do the grant writing, but we'll also then like stay on afterwards. If you get the grant award, what does that handoff look like? Because sometimes that's also tricky too, is like from the development team to the programs team. How do you make sure that everybody knows, oh, there's this marketing, there's some PR that we have to do. Let's make sure that gets done not only satisfactorily, but really well. So they, highlight us more and more in their annual report or where are their website. So, and then of course the program deliverables, you want to make sure that that's all there. And like we talked about earlier with staff bandwidth and time and capacity, sometimes that's just not something organizations can handle and do all of that on their own, but they might be at this really important inflection point of, hey, we have a great, we just got this huge, whatever it was, we got this recognition from the Library of Congress, or we just got this, award from this major donor, and there's all this news, there's all these articles about our organization right now, and we really want to capitalize on that, or whatever it might be. We're launching this campaign, and we really need to like jumpstart the funding for it. Whatever that is, that's kind of where I think where it makes the most sense to partner. But organizations, we're happy to help wherever an organization is, even if it's like, we know we just need more money, but we don't know what to do. We don't know where to start. And so help us, just help us figure this out. And we can take things, kind of piece by piece at that point too. So that's,
those are some of my favorites right
that's
there.
where we, that's how we help.
I like it when, I like it when it's like, I don't know what to do, Dan. I'm like, this is going to be wonderful, because so many times it's like, well, I'm pretty sure we're supposed to do that. And it's like, actually, that's not what we should do first. So it's just, I love it when it's, the exasperation, not that it's a great place to be
Right.
personally, but it is a great place to be because I think a lot of action can happen so quickly because there's no expectations. We just, okay,
Yep.
here we go, we got to do stuff, there we go. What kind of um percentages of like fundraising, because so I'm very much on the individual basis, so I'm dealing with large funders, I'm dealing with celebrities, I'm dealing with some corporations, I'm dealing with and then just your
Mhm.
average monthly donor on the street kind of thing who are giving in, corporate partnerships, etc. But what kind of percentage should grants be to your
Mm.
everyday funding? Is there like a sweet spot to be, or is it just like get as much grant money as you possibly can and sort them all out when we figure it out?
That's a conversation to have with leadership, right? Like that's something that, so I've seen studies
Oh,
that say
okay.
you should never have more than, not never have, but having more than like four revenue sources at a time is really difficult to manage, and really and can just be very difficult. Um, so think about that. I don't think that there's a specific percentage of grant funding per se. You don't want one funder paying 100% of any program, that's for sure. I would say, you definitely at least want 50% of that. And most won't even go for that. Most funders are maybe going to do 25% of a program. So depending on what your budget is for all your programs, right, and what your total budget ends up being, um, because grant funding, keep in mind that it comes from all these different sources, right? So grant funding can be, depends on how you define it: government funds, private foundations, family foundations, right? So there's many different corporate foundations. There's many different buckets of where that can come from. So I would also kind of take your buckets and look at what is the diversity of those revenue sources and how much are you getting from each of those, and is one really overruling the other. And if it is, then I would definitely raise that to leadership. Like
Mm,
if you're the development person and you're taking a look at all your ratios, I would, just at least socialize that, make it known. If you're not concerned about it, just make it known. It's a good kind of ratio data point to have. And if it turns out that, oh my gosh, 80% of our revenue is coming from corporate foundations, like, and on top of that, one foundation is giving us 50% of that revenue, that's a red flag. Definitely flag that, because you want to start to diversify that and build up more. If corporate support is what makes sense for
yeah.
you, then build up other opportunities for corporate support. So that's my long-winded answer to you're very.
Well, but that, I mean, that makes sense. Just like you want to diversify everything, so it isn't so like if something falls
but don't
out, it's not you're
diversify
not beholden
but don't
and falling
diversify
apart
so
and
much that you can't manage it, right? And you can't do everything well. That was my
right.
point about the four. What
That
I've
makes sense.
heard is like four sources. So making sure that, and maybe if you're a larger organization, you've got more staff and bandwidth, and you can actually manage that a little bit better. But for organizations that are maybe at the $10 million mark and below, four is plenty. That's a lot to
Hmm.
manage.
So four being one being some sort of
Hmm.
grant funding. So that's
Like
one. Two
individual.
being average donors. Three
Yep,
being
and a
corporate
fourth, let's say you
sponsors,
have an earned revenue
and then four being
income stream, or let's say you have a government funding stream, or whatever it might be, programmatic funding. Maybe you have a conference or a
right.
membership model, or whatever it is, and you're kind of collecting money in that way. So yeah,
Hmm.
those would be examples of the buckets.
Cool. Okay. So, as we come to the end of this, what is it that you think that like? So again, I've got a new hat on, and it's my
Mhm.
grant funding hat, and I'm a new nonprofit, or I started like COVID made me realize I hated my
Mhm.
corporate job, so I'm now doing the nonprofit thing because I can't deal with it's so much happening in the world. I want to make things better. How can nonprofits navigate the grant funding process
Mhm.
for the first time? What advice would you give?
Yeah. So I'm going to repeat a lot of what I already said. Do your research. Do your research.
Okay.
That's. I mean, it's
Okay.
just critical.
The
Like, I know I probably sound like a broken record, but it really is just really, it's so important, because if you don't do your research, you don't know what you're like. Ask those questions of your leadership. what is this program? Like, the way I like to think about it is I want to understand when I work with a client or when I'm on staff, I want to understand this organization 3D. I think about it as like a cube in space. And I think about, okay, we've got, this side of us that we do, maybe it's this particular program of smallholder farmers, and then we've got this part that's a savings and loan thing, and then we've got this part of our program that's more of a conference and a knowledge sharing, whatever it might be. So like, you think about your organization, and then you want to think, I like to think about it of like, I need to be able to then flip that cube around in space so I can see all the different angles of how these things all fit together. Not those programs necessarily. Yes, I want to understand how those programs fit together, but I want to understand if I see a funding opportunity for economic improvement, how do I connect that funding opportunity to my program? Right? So you need to have enough understanding of your organization and of your programming that you can do that, and that takes time. So again, patience, but that takes time to really get in there and understand all of those things. So like, ask questions of the board, ask questions of the CEO, leadership, whoever it is that you have access to really like, why do we do this, and how does it meet the mission, and what's the impact that we make, and just ask, be curious. I think that's one of the biggest things you can do. A little bit that's practical, but even more practical, I would say, don't write a grant the day that it's due. Please don't do that.
That's terrible.
I talked to someone recently who did that, and I was like, oh, sheesh. You could have called this foundation and found out a bunch of, like, they were asking me questions, and it was like, well, you could have called the foundation and
Oh,
chatted with
wow.
them about these questions, because I only know what I'm seeing on their website. I don't know this funder. So don't write a grant the day that it's due,
Right.
even if it looks like a simple one. And we all know this happens, right? Like, life happens, things get in the way, there's other deadlines.
Yeah.
I get it. But if you can
Yeah.
at all avoid it, there's always, like, I've been with organizations that have had technical glitches happen. So they're sending in the application the day of, and they
Oh,
have
yeah.
like weeks of work
Oh, yeah.
were just wasted because their application was not in on time, and there was no way around it. So don't do that to yourself. If you can know ahead of time, who am I supposed to be applying to, do your research on who they are, take a look at their application process. What is the process? Get those dates in your calendar, and what are the actual questions that they're asking, so you can get all of your responses. Like I said before, you want to work cross sectorally in your organization. So it shouldn't just be the development or the grants writer that's writing all this stuff. Maybe you're the one putting it together and actually writing it, but you're not the only one with your hands, hopefully, in this pot. There should be a financial aspect to this. There should be a programs aspect to this. There should be, right, there should be some sort of, hopefully, board buy-in, maybe not on every grant, but on the strategy overall. So um, give yourself enough time. I think that's one of the biggest things. Just give yourself enough time to do the research, to talk to the foundation if you can, and to actually write a quality, solid proposal.
Hmm. Wow. That's good. That's great. That's absolutely great. So, OSA Philanthropy, the first thing they should be doing, though,
Yeah.
is calling you. That's really the first thing, right? Like, but is there so
Mhm.
we can go to your website, we can connect with you that way. Um, any other
Yeah, there's
suggestions?
go to my website, osaphilanthropy.com. There's a contact form on the website. I'm on
Uh-huh.
LinkedIn. You can find me at Lara. I think it's Lara Pimentel at LinkedIn. Um, love to chat
Okay.
there. Awesome.
We'll put it in the show notes.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, I'm out there. So I think I've got a couple speaking engagements that will keep up on my LinkedIn. So if we're ever in the same
Nice.
place, that's a good kind of way to say hi and get to know each other. So that's always the way it works, right? Is you gotta not only know what I'm all about, but you gotta kind of understand, and if we're gonna work together, because fundraising, as we said, is not really a short game. hopefully we like each other and we can like create an enjoyable working experience together. So um, notes on thinking about working with a fundraising consultant: make sure that it's somebody that you like and you actually want to work with that person. Don't make it
To
difficult on
like,
yourself
yeah,
because it's hard
yeah,
work already.
yeah. Totally, totally. Well, Laura, thanks so much for being here. Thank you for your knowledge on that. I learned a bunch just now, so that's super great. And we'll have a whole bunch of information on you in the show notes that people can grab.
Thank you, Dan. This was awesome. Really appreciate it.
And that brings us to the end of today's episode. Big thanks to Lara Pimentel for being here with and giving us like the whole rundown on all that goes into getting grants and the research and everything that you need for that. If you want to connect with her, I've got links in the show notes, so you can just check her out or go to osaphilanthropy.com. And if you want to connect on anything social media related, or you want to delve deeper into how your story piece is working, check out portnoymedia.com. I've got links, I've got resources, just a whole bunch for you. Or you can just email me, dan@portnoymedia.com. Well, thanks so much for being here. We'll see you next time. My name's Dan. Have a great one.